Hey party people, what's up? Today I am going to be talking with my friend Rhiannon Bosse, a florist based in Michigan. Rhi is a former wedding planner for many years. She was planning weddings, then incorporated florals into her business, and now focuses on just the floral design, which she is excellent at. We have hired her for our clients in the past. We've collaborated on photo shoots together, and I wanted to sit down and chat with her about virtual mock-ups. Now, if you don't know what a mock-up is, we are going to talk about it today, so stay tuned. If you're new to this channel, thank you for watching. I'm Valerie Gernhauser, the no-nonsense wedding planner. I have 3 wedding planning companies. I'm based in New Orleans and I travel all over. If you want to see more, I've linked everything down in the description bar below so you can follow my work and see what we're up to. Now, today's discussion is going to be a fun one. I interviewed Rhi to talk about a recent blog post that she did. That's also linked down in the description below. Take a deep dive because it is so worthwhile. I wanted to discuss this and share with my audience because a lot of you are in the process of planning your wedding. And now if you're planning a wedding during a pandemic, I have a video for you up here that you can't miss. So be sure to watch that next. If you are in the planning process and you want to understand a bit more about the decor design and how that really all comes together, well, where the rubber meets the road is in the mock-up itself for a lot of reasons. Now, typically we do mock-up presentations or prototypes in person. But for one particular client this year, Rhi and I collaborated together on bringing a virtual mock-up presentation to life. This was actually back in January of earlier this year. It was before COVID was really a big thing, so we didn't necessarily have to do it because of lockdown reasons, but my clients live in Hawaii and it is very difficult for them to have travel time to be able to escape and come all the way to New Orleans where my office is based. Rhi is based in Michigan where her home and her studio is. So we needed to coordinate all of these moving parts and pieces to be able to articulate a very important part of our design process. We were able to do it quite successfully. I was also able to record some video of Rhi showing me the mock-up in her studio in Michigan while I was working in New Orleans that we could then share with our clients all the way in Hawaii. This hit on all cylinders. I can't wait to dive into the details. So without further ado, let's jump right into the interview about virtual mock-ups. Hey Rhi, how are you today?
Hi Val, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time to chat. So I wanted to cover today the discussion that you've sort of introduced on your Instagram about the virtual mock-up and share that with our audience, just sort of touching on the process of what a mock-up is, because I know you are a florist now, but you have also, of course, been a planner for many years, and your design process is what inspired me many years ago when I first heard you speak about how exactly you go about crafting this experience for your clients. I'd love to dive deep today and learn more about the value points in sharing this mock-up experience with clients and what that can offer. And let's explore, the advantages and other things surrounding virtual mock-ups. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are and what you do.
Sure. Loaded question. Okay. So like you mentioned, there was a season where I did wedding planning, design, execution, and florals for all of our clients. So it was a lot of hats to wear for a very small roster of clients per year. But what I loved about doing all those different things at once was the amount of control I had in working with a client and having, I guess, a hand in the final product. But with control comes, I just think, a dedication to having like a better outcome, if you will, at the end. So the control wasn't a need to, have it my way, but more so to make sure the end result was what the clients wanted. So that was where kind of that came from, to do all those different services. There was this end goal that I really wanted, but ultimately my heart kind of fell out of the wedding planning side, and I became more focused on wanting to make the aesthetics look a certain way, but not worry about the logistics that had nothing to do with the aesthetics. So there's a lot of logistics involved in design, right? Floor plans, rental contracts, clearance on tents, loading docks. I mean, all the things that are related to the aesthetics of the event still have logistics related. But when you think about like a timeline, or getting the bride down the aisle, or if the caterers are coming out on time, or vows, or bridal attire, like those things I didn't really want to deal with anymore. So now my current business model is focused on the floral elements, and then design if a client wants to loop us in for that. But it's been a weird year, as you know, and we're not here to talk about COVID so much, but bookings are just different now, especially in the season of transition. I do have a secondary business making natural soap, so that's gone really well in a season where everyone's washing their hands all the time. But all that to be said, regardless of where I've been in my professional journey, either as a planner designer, as a planner designer florist, or even now just as a florist, a mock-up has always been that secret sauce to my business and my client experience for so many different ways. And for those who don't know what a mock-up is, because I think there's a lot of confusion about what a mock-up means, and I think a lot of clients and vendors alike think that mock-ups are just for the elite. A mock-up is basically a rendering or a real life example of what, let's say, your tablescape is going to look like ahead of the wedding. And we're going to talk about all the benefits of why the mock-up is so great, because truly it's an endless list. But this mock-up experience is a great time for your vendors and for your clients to, and you obviously, to see all these elements come to life, and to give you the space to troubleshoot and really analyze and just see again what all of these proposed ideas are going to look like, so that you're not walking into the wedding and having it hit you, you know, with this element of surprise that you then can't change because it's the wedding day and hey, guests are going to arrive in 4 hours. Hope you're happy with this. So for me as a full service planner, when I was offering that service, to not do a mock-up almost made me feel like I wasn't doing my job to the best of my ability. It almost felt like I was leaving this like cross your fingers and hope it all turns out, you know, strategy on the table, which is very contradictory to what a wedding planner does. And also as a designer, that felt very backwards, right? As a designer, we're supposed to promise colors and textures and color stories and moods and visions to our clients that then they get to promise to their guests. And to not see those things myself and just hope and pray my vision is enough to be great on the wedding day almost feels a little bold, right? Like I know I'm good at what I do, and I know you're good at what you do, and there's thousands of vendors out there, but to just assume all the time that all these ideas I have are just going to be great, just trust it without measuring or trying or sampling or bringing things together, just feels, I think, a little brazen. So mock-ups are very important, and I'm really thrilled that you agree with that, and that on this wedding that we have together, where I get to be the florist for your planning team, we've really gotten to come together and make those two mock-up approaches, if you will, turn into magic. So
Yeah.
it's enough.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you hit on a lot of really salient points there right off of the bat, which I think is really great, that there's such an advantage to having the mock-up for lots of reasons. For the vendors to make sure that they're working well together and that they're executing it appropriately, the design, the aesthetic overall, for the client to appreciate exactly what is happening for their event. Because I don't know about in your situation, but a lot of times my clients are great with numbers, not so great with imagination. They don't think in colors like I do. And so I can say, yes, it's going to be great and wonderful, and it'll all come together. But for them, they really do want that sense of peace of mind to know what it will look like, because they can't just assemble it all in their brain and imagine it. And that just sort of puts the marmalade on the nose, as I like to call it, when they see what this will look like, all of these pieces coming together. And it's one less thing for them to have to think about down the road and worry about or wonder about even. It's just such a valuable experience for everyone involved. So let's talk about then what sort of how a mock-up comes around. I work with lots of florists, and I really am excited about this wedding that we will one day see happen. 2 years after its original date, it will come to fruition. But even more so, I am so happy that we did this mock-up together virtually, and I'll show some pictures of sort of what the result was here. But this is the only work I have to show for 2020, floral wise, design wise, event wise for my company. I'm so glad we documented this because normally when I'm doing in-person mock-ups, we don't necessarily have the same amount of documentation as we did this go around because my clients live in Hawaii, and it's very hard for them to come all the way to where I am in New Orleans. And they work on a farm. So it's even harder for them to pull themselves away from the working farm that they have and they're in charge of. You're in Michigan. And ideally, we've attempted many times to bring you to New Orleans in person so we can see work come together. But in this instance, we were so close to the actual wedding date that worked for the clients to be able to do this design presentation. We were just cutting it so close to have to mock up in person and fly them in that I ended up Zooming the design presentation with them while they were in Hawaii. I was in New Orleans, and then you and I connected for the actual mock-up of the flowers and the tablescape and everything else. So I think that we have touched on like kind of what the bird's eye view of a mock-up actually is. But let's dive into the details of it a little bit, because I know when I work with other florists, not everybody does a mock-up that I work with. And I've, in years past, because I know the value of it, I've had to push my florists to say, yes, let's build this into your process. Let's build this into what your clients invest in, because it will help with the overall scheme of their investment in their floral bill. And because they'll have that context piece to be able to put that into a frame of what this is actually going to be that they're investing in. So tell me then, what is a mock-up? Is it just the flowers?
Well, I think two things also are really important in case anyone listening to this is like, well, wait a second, I do 50 weddings a year. A mock-up is truly not feasible. Yes, a mock-up is not, this is not a one size fits all. Hey, do a mock-up this way. It's going to make your business better, right? So that needs to be said, that it's not for everybody, and it's not for every florist or every planner, because not every couple has a planner, right? Like this, we are a luxury service, an elite service, and it's not for every client. So I just want to throw that out there, because in life with anything, I don't think there's a right and a wrong way. There's a best way, and this might not be the best way for anyone. So I just wanted to point that out. Also for a mock-up, I think the way that I do a mock-up or the way you do your mock-up, because our approaches are very different, I think it's one of those things that you have to try it on for size and see what works for you and what your clients seem to react to best, and what your clients enjoy but don't enjoy, and what the padding is for building mock-ups into your pricing, or do you invoice the client separately for the mock-up and then maybe give them a choice if they want to do it. There's a lot of different ways, like business in general, to go about doing this. So I just want to throw that out there, that this isn't some like tried and true, hey, do it the way Rhi and Val does, and you're going to, make these huge strides. That being said, we do really believe in mock-ups. I believe in them firmly. So with the mock-up, I like to traditionally, let's go back to when I was a wedding planner, and then you can tell me if you relate. So I liked to pick a week where we could be together in person. That's always like the best case scenario. We can do this in person. Pick a date where we can be together. It can be a weekday, it can be a weekend. And the whole point of the mock-up is to come together and see a full tablescape put together. So we're talking the exact table size that you're going to have at a wedding. So not a cross section, not a sweetheart table size, not, a folding table butted up against a wall. Like if you're doing an estate table that seats 10, we're going to do all 10 chairs around the table and all 10 place settings. If there's two different looks happening, we're going to do both looks. So we're going to do the table that seats the 10 guests, and then we're going to do the 60-inch round that seats 8. So we're doing two different looks if that's what's being proposed for the actual wedding. You're getting actual chairs around the table so you can see what those look like and kind of get a feel for, you know, the spatial like recognition of where those chairs go. You're getting full linens and you're getting them ironed and steamed with no wrinkles. And then all the place setting items. So you're getting your chargers, you're getting your plates, you're getting your bread and butter plate if that's part of your dinner service, which in New Orleans, dinner service is very different than Michigan. It's right. It's formal plated here, and then it's buffet service where you are. So that's something to take into consideration. You're getting all your flatware, your glassware, and we're not just putting like a champagne flute down on the table, right? Like, what is your drink service going to be? Are you getting a champagne toast that's happening at the table? Are you getting a signature drink that's being passed when salads come out? What glassware is going to be at the table once dinner is underway, and how can we see again spatially what that looks like? Those are all getting put out at the table. Menu cards, those are being put down. Napkins, how are we folding those? Those are being put down. Are you having favors at your wedding? And if so, is that being something put at each place setting? If it is, we're putting those out at the mock-up so you can see what your little bottle of hot sauce or what your little macaron sleeve or what your whatever tchotchke it is you're giving, right? That is on the table and you can see what that looks like. And then beyond that, we obviously have all of your kind of star of the show pieces, if you will, that goes in the middle. And those are your centerpieces, your candles, your auxiliary decor, anything that's really making that table shine, that's going in the center so that they can see, like you said, the colors and the textures and the tones and the what's in season, right? Like I love being able to do mock-ups on the same date, around the same date, same time of year at least, that the wedding will be happening so that you can really see the exact shade of blue that I'm proposing or the exact size of the peony when you get it in May from a local farm or a dahlia in October when you can cut it down from the farm down the road. It's so different than what you might be able to get, if you can even get a dahlia, you know, in the middle of February. So, and then the mock-up, obviously, seeing these things is one part of it, but then having your client be a part of it, or in the very least other vendors like a planner, like a rental company, like a caterer. You know, you can really bring in any vendor if you'd like, but having those people beyond the clients be a part of the mock-up to also see what you're planning and have it be a more collaborative approach. And also just to build the excitement, that's the other half of the mock-up and what makes it so great, right? It's not just let's all see this thing and check off this list and say, yep, approved. Let's get excited about your wedding and talk about the colors and talk about the mini pineapples and talk about how these things finally look now that we're seeing them in person because you've seen them only in a design board or only on Pinterest or only in a Zoom presentation, right? Like let's actually tangibly see these things and get you excited for your big day.
Absolutely. And this is one of the only moments that the clients will have to see the full design without 100 people in front of the tables. And, you know, they're entertaining guests as they're coming in and saying hi and hugging loved ones and all of those things that they should be doing on their wedding day and would naturally be doing, instead of having that very quiet, pensive moment to take in all of this design, that in the same way that their guests will have that opportunity, right? Because the guests will sit there and see the table and really get to appreciate it all in its glory. But on event day, that is rarely the case for the clients themselves to be able to appreciate it in quite that same way. And yeah, you're right, it does build that anticipation in a way that, tangibly speaking, you can touch the linen and feel the quality. You can see the way that the textures play off of each other with the different flower variations that are in the centerpieces, the flickering of the candlelight, all of those things that just, they don't quite translate in 2D as well. So.
Well, and I think also, because I know some vendors would argue, well, we build in a first room reveal with our client, right? Like we work, because we always worked as hard as we could to make sure that was built in. And that's hard to do when a couple skips a first look, when there's a really tight timeline, if there's inclement weather that forces everyone into a space sooner than you want them to be. It's also really hard when you have Aunt Patty who just has to see the room, and you know, have mom who has to come put her cell phone down because God forbid she doesn't have a seat at the table. Like there's all these things and people that sometimes make that first room reveal nearly impossible. So if anyone's arguing that, it's definitely something that, you know, we understand is a very important part of the wedding day timeline, but you're also forgetting the mock-up isn't just for this moment of excitement, right? There is an actual element of, hey, we have to work in this mock-up and use this time to troubleshoot if we need it, right? If you have a mock-up and everything's perfect, the client's happy, you're happy, all your measurements, all your visions, all your dreams are coming to life, and you can move on and just, hey, we're just going to duplicate this times 30 in 2 months. Awesome. But I have very rarely done a mock-up where I haven't made any changes or where the client hasn't requested changes. And sometimes a client might not request a change. They're happy with everything, but there's something you see on the back end with the knowledge and experience you have that you know you need to change to better serve your client. And those can be really simple changes that, again, like the naked eye wouldn't notice. Maybe it's the texture in a flower that you've used, it just doesn't look right. Or maybe it's because you're doing a family style meal, you're just noticing that the platters that will, put down the Italian pasta dish are just too cumbersome on the table, or they're going to crack because they get too hot. Like, these are all little things that a client has hired you to notice that they're not going to notice. And you're going to use that time at the mock-up to make sure you fix those things so they're not issues on the wedding day, right? So, again, the list of reasons of why this mock-up is so beneficial just far goes beyond building this really great experience, which it does, but it's twofold.
It's a dress rehearsal. It's the ultimate dress rehearsal for the wedding decor, as close as you're going to get to be able to see all of those nuanced details in person, be able to make those adjustments, whether the client requests those changes or you see something that could work better or different. And we've even done this in the past, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but brought in some alternate samples. Of course, we have our design presentation is very dialed into the details of what we recommend for our clients. But if it's a matter of a marble charger versus a slate, colored solid charger, and that's the design difference that really matters to the client, well, we'll have some extras on hand to be able to swap out and see if that gets a different reaction out of the client, or if they do want to sort of have a bit of tweaking that maybe they didn't otherwise see as a possibility, but we have these options that we can, alternate in. And that engenders, an even greater discussion about what really they do prefer. And it's great when you hit the nail on the head the first time, but it's rare that there isn't even the slightest revision after this mock-up. So I think that that's what, really does make it such a well-rounded, essential part of, the planning process. We're going to take a small break right now. And if you're finding value in this information, take a second and hit that like button. And if you're not already subscribed, please consider subscribing to this channel, because it really helps us get this information out to others like yourselves that are looking for more information about how to plan their wedding. And with that, we're going right back to the interview.
Well, and I also think too, if we compare the mock-up to other vendors' approaches, right? I don't know really any client, regardless of what they're spending on their wedding, or even like a friend or family member getting married, right? Like, let's even take this out of the context of having a higher budget wedding, but I don't know anyone who is fully comfortable with hiring a caterer and not doing a tasting, right? Like, most people want to taste their food before they serve it to all their guests. I would say 100% of brides, I'm sure there's exceptions, but 100% of brides probably try on a dress before they buy it. They probably get alterations, and they probably try it again after they get the alterations, right, to make sure it fits. They probably do a hair and makeup trial, or in the very least look at pictures of what the beauty artist can do and what they're good at. They probably go look at a venue and walk through it to make sure they like it and it's got what they need and that the windows are in the right place, right? And again, whatever details they're looking for, but they want to go see the place they're going to get married at. You go and you taste wedding cake, right? And you pick out your flavors. You don't just pick chocolate from a menu on a PDF online and say, you know what, I trust that chocolate cake is going to be the best chocolate cake I've ever had. If you're getting a band, you listen to samples online of what they can play and you see how they interact with the crowd. So why is it that you do all these things with all these vendors, but then when it comes down to all this money you're spending on this look that's going to set the tone for your wedding and be something that's going to really make or break how things look at your wedding, you're just going to kind of, again, cross those fingers and hope it all turns out? When you kind of put it in that perspective, it's a little crazy that we're not doing more mock-ups in my mind.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, no, I'm with you. And that's why I've tried to, I'm not forceful with anybody to like, you have to do this, it's my way or the highway, but I definitely encourage, my floral vendors, locally and otherwise that aren't building this into their process already, that, hey, let's push a little bit farther our creativity and our process and our ability to do this, because something great could really come from this. And why not just, if you have a client that doesn't have a planner, invest in a couple of $100 or however much you think you can build into the overall proposal to share that piece of work and that artistry with your clients, because they will benefit so much more from this experience. And you will learn along the way too. And then you'll have this tangible piece, just like you mentioned, the food and the cake and the drinks and the band and everything else, to be able to see exactly what it is, more so than just reviewing Instagram pictures and a volume of a portfolio that's just endless but not specific to what it is you are ultimately wanting in your design as the client. So
yeah, I mean, I said this in my blog post. I understand, because I've been in that boat before, that sometimes a full-fledged mock-up with the template settings, 2 different looks, like you are getting into a really high price mount, if you will, to execute an exact replica of what you're proposing at the wedding, right? And then the argument comes down to, well, whose responsibility is that? Is that the clients or is that the vendors? So maybe you do scale it back and you do offer half of a table, or you do just a centerpiece on a table with a linen, or you maybe splurge on the photographer, which we'll get to have beautiful professional images of what that vignette looks like, but then you don't do X, Y, and Z, right? Maybe you get creative about what feels most important to showcase to the client, and also kind of scratch your back and meet the needs that you have. And maybe you call up a planner and you say, hey, I don't really have it in the budget to do a full-fledged a full-fledged mock-up, but here's what I can do. Do you maybe want to go half and half on this with me? Is this going to benefit you? I can put $300 towards this. Could you put 300? We have 600 to work with. What could we do? Right? It's asking those questions and being open and being willing to be flexible. What's the worst that planner is going to say? No? Great.
right.
I still have 300. What can I do with 300? Right?
Right.
So I think that's just important too, is to note that it's not feasible for every planner, every florist, every vendor to do a huge mock-up. Just like it's not, valuable for a baker to do a cake tasting with 30 flavors and then not have that client book them, right? Like there's bills we have to pay, right? We need to be financially savvy with how we do these things, but there are loopholes around it to still get the same effect of a mock-up, even if you're doing it on a smaller scale. There's still the same deliverables and there's still the same targets you're hitting if you do something a little bit smaller and pare back.
Right. Well, I 100% agree with everything that you just said right there. So let's switch gears then a little bit, and let's talk about when you can't do it in person, which is obviously the optimal time. When you can't do an in-person mock-up, what situation would be appropriate to try a virtual mock-up? And then let's walk through the steps of how that gets set up into place.
Sure. So obviously right now, like you said, people aren't really meeting face-to-face in any industry. If you have a client that's a destination client, so I feel like our clients that we mutually share have everything stacked against them. They're far away, there's COVID, there's their farming schedule, there's all these things. So sometimes, pandemic aside, you might have clients that just live so far away that it's not feasible for them to drop $2,000 on a round trip plane ticket just to come back and see their mock-up, right? Or sometimes there's a work conflict, right? So somebody can't get away from work, or maybe you're going on a maternity leave and the timing just isn't working out right with personal circumstances. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, pandemics aside, where a virtual mock-up would be sufficient in place of an in-person one. And like I touched on in that blog post I wrote, I think there's a lot of elements about a virtual mock-up that almost trump having it in person, because nothing's perfect, that you might want to consider, even when we can do face-to-face mock-ups, having virtual mock-ups in favor of those, right? So going back to my thought about maybe vendors who need to do a budget version of a mock-up, that's a really great way to still show a client something that's going to lend to what their wedding day looks like, but doing it at a fraction of the cost. And the key is just to do it well, right? So for the mock-up that we did in January, knowing that I was doing it in my home because this was at the beginning of COVID, right? So everything was like very locked down. So we did it in my home. For me to do an 8-foot table with 8 chairs and then a 60-inch round with 8 chairs, full place settings, which the place settings came from 2 different companies. The linens came from a third. Then we had your opinions, obviously, that needed to be met. Then I had the flowers. Then we had paper that I had pulled from my inventory. I mean, there's a lot of different moving pieces, again, in my little living room here in the middle of winter where we couldn't really go anywhere anyways. So for that purpose, we decided to go with more of an editorial feel to still show the client, here are the deliverables you're going to get, but here's how beautiful and editorial they're going to look when photographed by a professional. And in that regard, would it have been nice for you and for your team and for the clients to be here at a rental house, walking around a full table and seeing, you know, that full centerpiece garland down the table? Absolutely. But what they got was just as good, in my opinion, given the circumstances. And now it's a blueprint for us to look back on as we go through these next 2 years leading up to the wedding to say, yep, we still like that. Might change that now, but for the most part, we do like this. Let's just duplicate it. I don't know what your experiences were being far away with that mock-up, because I was the one. For me, like, the mock-up was different because yes, I was calling you, and this is the first time I think I've done a mock-up not as the planner. And in that way, I probably know what you're looking for as a planner, but I'm also not you, so I don't know what you're looking for. So it was weird for me having to call you, but again, not all that weird because I was also here like touching things still, so that didn't change. What were your thoughts or your experience kind of being at the mercy of when I was calling you?
Well, so that was an interesting day, because in true, like, I don't know if it's me that's snake bit or lightning struck, but like, a day that is perfectly planned is never going to happen the way I plan it. It's going to have some hiccups, and I just have to make it happen. So that day we had a lot going on, even though I blocked off the entire day for this virtual experience with you. But what was great was you called in, you FaceTimed, so I could see you and you could show me different elements that you were working on while you were building it. So I knew that the photos from Sam were coming, which was awesome because you had said that you were having her come in and shoot. That was a great addition to this whole experience that we wouldn't have had, honestly, if it was in person, but I probably will now moving forward. Anyway, you call on FaceTime and you're like, this is what I'm working on now. This is the centerpiece. This is a this is a that. Look at these chargers, which are these beautiful wood shaped chargers from Emerson James. I hadn't seen them yet in person, but we had ordered them for our clients for the overall look. And you made a great note that these things are not necessarily level in the same way that maybe a normal charger would be. So the plate kind of sits, the dinner plate or something didn't fit quite right. But the salad plate did. And so you asked me right there, can we swap this out? Like, are you okay if I do this? And then you were able to show me the options and I could see it and appreciate it. And you being right there and having that planning background was essential because you knew that this is something a planner would want to know about, the nuanced details of what the seated dinner is actually going to look like. So that was a really dynamic experience because we would get off the phone and then you would shuffle things around and do something different, and you would do the cocktail tables, and we had all the linens sent to you, we had the plates sent to you and the napkins and everything else. And your attention to detail is, you know, second to none. And you would constantly reach out to me and say, hey, this is what I did. Did I do this right? Based on the design presentation that our team had built that we'd send to you. And you would build off of that and say, I've done this, but this doesn't seem like it's working, but I want to be sure that you're okay with that. And that, I think, is where the most, I hate to say synergy, it just makes me laugh every time. But that kind of synergy is what is essential to building this piece of art for our clients. And that's, you know, what happens there. Even virtually speaking, you know, you would take a break and you would do something else and I would wait for your FaceTime call. And look at it and we would have our conversation, and then you're like, okay, I'm gonna call you in 20 minutes, and then another 30 minutes I'm gonna give you a call. I'm like, great. No, it was awesome.
Yeah,
it
I love.
was wonderful. And then we have that takeaway to share with our clients too.
Right.
So
Well, and I think that's one of the key differences between an in-person mock-up and a virtual mock-up is unless you schedule an in-person mock-up time strategically, schedule that strategically so that all of those like little conversations with the vendors are done before your clients arrive. With a virtual mock-up, you're doing that before the client's even brought into the experience, right? And in person, it's almost impossible to keep the man behind the curtain hidden. And with a virtual mock-up, you can do that. And I feel like that should be done for your clients unless they feel strongly about being included, which I would only ever include a client in that if they asked, to be honest, or if there was something where like a disagreement on a price or confusion on the price of something. I might be like, well, here's why, and show them something I otherwise wouldn't. But for the most part, we got to have all that back and forth and make those decisions about the plates and the chargers not being sturdy enough without the clients listening,
right.
or standing awkwardly there with their parents wondering like, well, can we trust these people? And do they know what they're doing? And why would they have suggested this charger if they knew it? Well, we didn't know. That's why we're doing the mock-up. But at an in-person meeting, it's hard to have those conversations, and it's hard to ask questions that might look like you're doubting yourself when really you're just trying to be better at your job. It's really hard to do that in person, whereas on the virtual end, you have that time to do the back end planning, and then on the front end, show the client kind of the fruits of your labor, if you will. So I thought that was a really cool part of that, is it was very, hey, let's work together, do this thing, have these calls, but then once we figure out the best way to present this, the clients get to soak that up and get excited about it. And they never even had to leave their home, right? That's like the best part. So
yeah.
Yeah.
No, that was, to me, it was a win-win situation for that scenario, just given what, it wasn't specifically COVID that made us do this. That was just starting to enter into the fold as we had scheduled this, but it did reveal a lot of benefits I didn't even anticipate in doing it this way, because normally I would just have you come in person. We would even set it up at the tasting. So we do our design presentation one day and we go over everything in like 2D form. And then the next day we have our big menu tasting, and usually it's at the caterer's place or at the venue if we can, and try and put it in as much context as possible, build everything out in person. We've even had a situation where we ate the tasting at the table where, the mock-up was done, and the clients loved it and said, this is exactly what I've always dreamed. Like, they loved that. They said even more than they thought they would love the wedding day. They love the wedding day more, but just that sort of touch point was so nice to be able to do in person. But also there's other benefits, like you mentioned, for doing it virtually that we can do on the vendor side of things to make that experience even more buttoned up for the big day itself, which I think is really valuable too.
Well, and the mock-up's not replacing anything. That's the important part, right? So for a client that doesn't get a mock-up or get an in-person mock-up where you get the experience of eating your meal at your table, or whatever other like benefits you feel you get from that time, you still get the wedding. It might be delayed because of COVID, but like ultimately you're going to hopefully get the wedding, which is the part that you're kind of looking most forward to, I would hope. So, yeah, I think that's important to note, is that if the mock-up isn't this full-fledged, experience like we're talking about, where you're eating your meal at your place setting and it's a 2-day affair like you do with your clients, that's okay. It can be something simple and it can be virtual, because again, you have the big finale that's, what we're working up to, that's eventually done. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a given. And that is in and of itself what all the anticipation over the year or more of planning is leading up to. And it's the celebration of bringing people together. This is another sort of side effect, I think, of where we are now in 2020, is there is a heightened sense of awareness about the importance of people. And at the end of the day, I say to my clients, at the end of the day, no matter what happens, you're no less married to the love of your life. So anything could happen. And that's the goal. Let's let's center back on what the real, point of all of this is. And everything else is just gravy. It's nice, it's beautiful, it's a seamless experience no matter what else happens.
Right.
So that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah, and that's what I try to keep in mind when I have a client who's really torn on an aesthetic decision. So if they're torn between two linen choices at a mock-up, which we can talk about decision overload at mock-ups because that was something that somebody had brought up to me. But if I have a client who's just like beating themselves up over their indecisiveness towards a specific color or a tone or a way texture is playing with something, or a $2 discrepancy between two different colors that they can't figure out, I'm like, listen, at the end of the day, I want your choices to be represented. So please tell me what that choice is going to be. But if it's really something as small as the difference between coral and peach, or ruffles versus tassels, or something very minute that's not like a huge deal, please let us make that decision for you so you can focus on the things that matter, which is mingling with your guests. Go to marriage counseling. If you want to spend your time doing something really well in the engagement process, hire professionals to take care of you and go to marriage counseling leading up to your wedding. That's the best thing you can do. Nurture relationships with your family, right? Go travel, go do things that are going to matter in the long term, because the charger plate, that's important. We're here to make sure it's important, but it's not going to matter when the wedding's over. So just pick your battles, I guess. I think that's another point that I want to highlight. And if you hire the right people, they're going to help do that for you. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, all good points. All good points. Well, let's touch on decision paralysis then, when you have so much that you have to choose or make decisions on. How do you navigate that with your clients through this process?
Yeah. Well, I'd love your feedback on that, even because I feel like the bar just keeps getting higher and higher in the wedding industry as more companies come out with cooler things and more designs. And, the more we see things, the more it's been done, right? And then we have to strive for the next new thing. I always talk about when we got married 10 years ago this week. I wanted striped straws at my wedding for our drinks. And let me tell you where I had to find striped straws. So we got married in Canada. I had to call a catering wholesale distributor in New York City, and all they had was white and gray. You can go to Target now, you can go to Hobby Lobby now, and they've got polka dot straws and little duckies on straws and Etsy's like exploded with, all the things that you can get. So just, I look at the rental selections that are available to clients now, and the flatware designs and the China patterns, and even the charger plates, just how brilliant and beautiful and lovely they are, and the linen options, and even the different flowers that are being bred by farmers now. There's a lot of options out there. I would be overwhelmed as a bride myself, and I'm a pretty decisive person by nature. So I think decision fatigue is like or paralysis, as you said, it is very real. So I think it's a couple things. I think you need to really learn your clients and learn what their decision-making, I guess, approach is. Do they seem quick to make decisions? Do they get really overwhelmed? And do they get overwhelmed because they're distracted by shiny things? Or do they get overwhelmed because they're not sure what represents their story best, right? I think getting to know your clients on a relational level is really important, so you can steer them in a certain direction. I think that's really important. And then also knowing, if you do a mock-up with that client, how many options is going to be best for them. So if they are typically distracted by a lot of things and it's hard for them to make decisions, maybe you just bring one option or maybe even just two to their mock-up so that they can just pick between A or B. If there's someone that truly just wants a lot of options, and once they see what they like, they can like zero in on it, maybe it's okay to bring more for that client and bring them 5 linens if maybe you're really torn too. If you trust that's not going to make their life more chaotic. This all circles back to having a really solid client experience from the get-go, and having a lot of conversations, and having a strong brand that attracts the right kind of clients, so that by the time you get to the mock-up, there isn't this decision-making, right? What are your thoughts on how many options to bring to a mock-up? Because I know with this January mock-up we did, We had a couple different options, but that was mainly because we had two different styles of tables we were going to do, and we ended up using that maybe to our benefit. But if you had a wedding where there was just one table style, how would you approach showcasing the different options for the pieces to a client?
I am very glad that you asked. My style is to, how do I put this? I would prefer to do all of the storytelling myself. I don't let my clients like even peek at anything until they sit down for the design presentation, because I want them to have that wow factor and that anticipation. So for me, my job is to do the full storytelling and pick for them. And there's a whole like process that I go through to design to the budget and give them options that are within range for what they expect to spend, because I'm not in it to upsell them. I'm not in it to say, oh, if I put this shiny little fish out there, then they'll bite on that bigger one and spend more money. That's not my goal. I don't think that's responsible in the way that I work with my clients. So I don't give them a whole lot of options, because what I'm already building for them is specifically tailored to what I think is a good fit for them. But I will alternate in one or two other things that look good with the overall aesthetic, so it doesn't drastically change the look of the design that we've built out. It is relatively similar in price point to the thing that I've picked, in case they really feel strongly one way or the other about a chair. Or I had one bride that hated candles and we've never had a reason to talk about her distaste for candles. And I'm like, candles are pretty inoffensive in my book. So
yeah.
Right. So I'm like, oh, and then we'll have these beautiful garlands down the staircase and then a pool of candlelight at the bottom. And she was like, I don't like candles. So there you go. Well, then we will take out the candles if you feel that strongly about them. It's your day. So I'm definitely in the range of like having that feedback dynamically happen, cater to what the preferences are for the client. But when it comes to the number of options, I don't design like two full looks and pick look A or pick look B and mix and match. I can't do that. That's just not how I am creatively designed. And some other planners do, and that's cool too. So I just limit the options to what will easily alternate in, and I do that full storytelling myself for my clients.
Yeah. Well, and that lends itself to there's a way that works for you and for your business and ultimately for your clients, right? Because if you're attracting the right type of client, your clients are all going to be generally similar, I think, maybe compared to like another group of clients to a different planner or vendor, whichever we're talking about. So I also think if you have a specific client, like your client who doesn't like candles, right? You might have a specific client that really loves flowers, like that's their thing. Or you have a client who's like really into linens or really into stationery for whatever reason. So maybe with the client that loves linens, you bring more options to that meeting for that client, right? There's maybe 5 linen options, but just one centerpiece or just one china pattern, or maybe you don't even need a chair because the venue includes chairs and we're just gonna, hope those are great. And that's where it comes into catering the experience to what the client needs, and making sure that you don't just like slap on this one size fits all mock-up to everybody when that client who loves linens doesn't really care about the rest. She just wants to make sure the linens look really beautiful with all the other pieces you've already determined. And that could just, I can't say it enough. It goes back to knowing your client really well and asking a lot of questions. And a mock-up isn't a time to get to know your clients. Like this isn't a meeting where we're like getting to know each other and tell me what you like and let's brainstorm. Like that needs to be done well in advance in your creative process. By the time you get to the mock-up, it should be there should be a pretty firm foundation relationally between you and the clients and even the other vendors, to where you can not think for one another, but make decisions for the betterment of the group, right? And I think that's a really important note too, is that the mock-up isn't, you're not doing this as like a preliminary relationship building at the beginning of a working relationship, right? This is after a lot of decisions have been made, conversations have been had. So you can be in a place that the mock-up makes sense. You're not going home to the mock-up to like rework everything because you missed the mark at it, right?
Right. No, it is at the final stage of that design. It's the culmination of all the design work that you do leading up to it. I liken it, I'm a huge Mad Men fan, and to me, the mock up and the design presentation is my Don Draper moment presenting to Coca Cola. You know, I should know exactly who I'm talking to, and the way that it is presented is in that knowing because of the relational building that we have worked on for months and in some cases a year or more up to that time when we show the work. And my job is to hit it out of the park, you know, with that. And you know, knock on wood, so far that is what has happened with clients because we've done the hard work at the beginning to get to know them really well.
Right. Well, and I think it's important to also understand you might not hit the nail on the head, but it's better to miss it at the mock-up than on the day of, right? Um,
Absolutely.
I mean, I kind of feel like throwing up when I think about the things that the situations you can run into if you were to run into them on a wedding day versus something that could have easily been troubleshot months before at a mock-up, right? Like just really simple things. I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example. Just a linen. I mean, I hate to go back to linens, but you can't tell in like the little, luckily a lot of linen companies are now upgrading what their linens look like on their website from like the square swatches to actual photos of what the linens look like in person, which is still not accurate, but better than a little swatch. So like with, I won't name names, but some linen companies, I'll go to Pinterest, type in the linen company's name and then the name of the linen to see examples of how that linen's been used in events. So I can see, oh, that emerald green velvet actually lends more to a turquoise color, whereas on the linen's website, like that's a true green, forest green, right? Like I'm not going to trust the forest green swatch. I'm going to go with the example of what I see on Pinterest from another photographer from an event I had nothing to do with, right? Um, so anyways, I'm going off on a tangent, but um, if you didn't do a mock-up and you just trusted the swatch on the screen and then you get to a wedding and you open these boxes, that's thousands of dollars of rented linens and your client's going to be really disappointed because it's nothing like what you had planned for, or you had picked stationery that's supposed to be the same green but now it's not, and you have linens that look blue. That's like a stomach drop kind of moment as a vendor, right? And you can't troubleshoot that on a day of when your linen supplier's closed on the weekend and their state's away. That's the kind of stuff you want to avoid, right? And that's the kind of stuff that will make or break you as a planner or as a designer, florist, whatever category you're working in. That's the kind of stuff that's going to either build or kind of ruin your reputation. So
Yeah, absolutely. And even the beautiful swatches that we have, the swatch books and the samples that we have in person in our office, I have been surprised at the linens that come in full size based off of the swatch that I've picked. I thought, oh, this is going to be amazing and beautiful. And then I'm like, oh, well, we'll throw in a couple of these other ones too, just in case. And then I like the other ones better when I see it full size, when I see that, oh, wow, this is way more sheer than I expected it to be. Because I couldn't tell that with the 4x4 swatch necessarily, or the texture is just way more overpowering than I imagined. Having that opportunity in advance to really, you know, appreciate that in person in full is super valuable. And then bringing it back to photographing it, having Sam shoot it in that light is another thing I've discovered, you know, after the fact. As I learn with every event is a learning experience, that linen that to my eye looks and a certain way or is a certain color, and then once it's on camera in natural daylight outside and it's shot, looks like a little bit different, you know, than what I maybe was appreciating with my own eye. So shooting it ahead of time actually helps make sure that all of those things are buttoned up as well.
yeah, no, I think the photographer element's really key. Um,
Yeah.
for so many different reasons. I always find as a floral designer, my designs look completely different captured in a photo than they do to my naked eye. Even when I don't have a photographer on hand for a project I'm doing, I always take iPhone pictures because I can see holes in my arrangements or negative space that just looks funny that to my naked eye, I truly cannot see. And it's night and day when it's captured in an actual, image. So Yeah, I think having Sam there was really important. And, you know, Sam is not the contracted photographer for this event. So again, like that's a little bit different, but that was us getting creative to find a way to, okay, the client can't be here. The client can't even be here on this call right now. Like I'm not FaceTiming the clients like I am you, Val. So how can we share with them the combination of what we've worked on and made happen here beyond just like some iPhone snaps, right? Like,
Right.
because I can take a great picture, I can filter it just fine, but again, like this is a client who's investing a lot into their wedding day and deserves a gallery of images. It's the least we could do, right? To give them some kind of semblance of what they could have gotten if they were able to make it happen in person, which that's not to say they didn't like try to make it happen. That wasn't what that was supposed to come out as, but that's like the least we can do to bundle it up and give to them, right? Is like, here's what your wedding's going to look like when it happens. Here are some professionally composed, edited images that show just the depth of the texture that we've, you know, selected and the tones that we've selected. And like, this is your vision. Do you agree?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And even more valuable, the conversations I've had with the clients since we've had to postpone their date have been, we don't want to change anything because they know what they're getting. They're like, we are not changing anything. We might want to change out some of the drinks, you know, to a year and a half from now. We might have a different like signature cocktail, but everything else we're keeping the same because they have the assurance of knowing what that is and they don't want to let that go, which is awesome. So we don't have to spend this downtime like getting other inspiration and pull it. Oh, but wait, what? How can we incorporate this? And let's bring this in. And then it's like, well, where did the design even go now? You know, we're on a completely other event at
Right.
that point. So,
Well, and when those conversations come up, you can use those photos to kind of lure them back in and be like, okay, so you want to consider blush pink? Like, look at this picture. Where does the blush pink fit into this, right? And maybe
right,
it is. And that's where our job is, to have those conversations and either roll with and jump off the cliff with them, or kind of get them back and say, no, step away. You don't need to go down that path. But looking at those pictures and saying, but we have this great vision. Do you still feel like you agree? Oh, yeah, you're right. Never mind. I saw something that was really beautiful, but that has nothing to do with my event. Those pictures
right,
are just like that anchor, right? That brings you back to what we have solidified and what we would have gone with if the wedding had happened too. That's the other thing too, is like, well, would you have looked back on the wedding if it had happened according to schedule and regretted not having that pink, or do you still feel like this would have been with what you went with? Like, what changed if you're asking now to add or change something, and
right.
getting like the core, like the base of what's driving that decision? Is it shiny object syndrome? Is it seeing something that just happened so it's timely? Like, you always have to circle back to that, like, why, and use those photos as a reminder, that anchor to pull you back in.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait for this event to happen. And I want to thank you so much for taking your time today to chat with me. I think this is a very enlightening conversation for vendors and clients and really anybody that would come across this information. I'm going to link to your blog post as well. So that way everybody that sees this can find that information, which is so from your heart and just so detailed as you are about everything that you do. But in closing, what do you have to share about anything else related to the mock-up experience that we haven't, already covered? What would be your final takeaway from this?
Yeah, great question. I feel like we covered a lot. Um,
Sorry to put you on the spot. I know it.
Hey, there's so many different ways to do it, right? Like I'm thinking back to one of the first mock-ups I did. And I remember it was in this room, which is like I'm in my home, and we call this our fancy front room. So like growing up, my mom had a fancy front room where we never really like went in there, and we weren't allowed to go in there with food or drinks. It's usually where the Christmas tree was. If guests came over, they were in the fancy front room. So we have one of those rooms. It was supposed to be my office, but it's the untouchable room now. And I remember this room had no furniture in it when we built our house or anything. And now it's for lots of people. But I remember getting a small like end table from my house and putting, I think it was a curtain, over that table for this mock-up, and it was just a floral client, so it wasn't like full planning in any regard, but I really wanted them to see what their centerpiece was going to look like with all the colors they had selected, because their color palette was very out of my wheelhouse. It was very like hot pinks and magentas and coral tones, and they wanted green amaranthus in their designs, which is like a limey color. It was just a lot of colors that weren't really my style at the time, and maybe still aren't, but I didn't really have the confidence to trust in my vision at the time. And I didn't have any of their rental place settings because I wasn't involved in that part, right? So I like pulled stuff from my, kitchen, which like was IKEA stuff at the time. And I'll never forget just like setting up this random table with this like curtain on it in my living room with this centerpiece for them to see. In my mind, it was, I'm mocking up a sweetheart table for them, like a table for two. Like this is what a table for two would look like. And we did it. It was great. And they drove so far, like 2 hours away to come and see it, and met in my home. And I like circle back to how like far I've grown and come since then. But like the heart behind doing the mock-up is still the same from them. And the excitement that client felt, I would say is probably pretty spot on to what clients now feel. So I think if your intentions behind the mock-up are in the right place, it's hard to mess it up. And that client actually messaged me. They just had a 7-year anniversary, maybe 8-year anniversary. And she sent me a picture of her bouquet, and she's like, I still love my bouquet so much. And it's like the photographer had photographed the back of the bouquet, which like makes me cringe, because now I know from that wedding alone that I always give each photographer a tour of the bouquet, especially now that I'm not a planner. If I'm just dropping a bouquet off and leaving, I have to tell the photographer that, because if I leave and they don't know what side I designed to be the star of the show, well, then I'm going to get images back in a month and not be able to use them. So anyways, I just thought that was cute that she sent me that picture, and I'm thinking, okay, if she's still happy, then we did something right. But all of that to say, you don't have to do, again, this full-fledged seating seating for 10 at a huge table where you're eating this meal and having favors out. Like, it is a lot. It's a huge financial investment. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of moving pieces that might not be in the cards for you or be right for everyone, and that's okay. You can still do something really simple to add to the client experience and make your process easier, and make the clients just put even more trust and value in you, in their vendor. And that's where you need to get creative. I think if 2020 has taught us anything, it's we have to get creative about our life right now, about how we connect, how we nurture those relationships with one another, how we keep our kids happy when we do calls like this. There's a million ways that we're having to get creative about our life. And this is an opportunity to not feel disappointed about change, but to instead get excited about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love the sense of excitement every time I have the opportunity to get creative. So looking forward to more of that in the future. So.
Yeah, I am too. Thank you for having me, Val, and for all your just willingness to jump in and have conversations that benefit other people and to share your wisdom. And you are just a beacon of light and knowledge and just so much goodness in the wedding industry and beyond. So I'm grateful to have been a part of this.
Thank you so much, Rhi, for joining us today. This was a wonderful use of an afternoon. I'm so grateful for your generosity in sharing this information with our audience. And now it's time for the question of the day. If you're planning your wedding right now, are you going to see a mock-up of your design? I'd love for you to tell me in the comment section below, so be sure to tell me what your design process is like as an engaged couple planning your wedding right now. I'd love to hear more thoughts or questions that you might have about the design process, so don't be shy and be sure to pop those into the comment section as well, because I read all of those comments and it inspires new ideas for videos just like this one that might be beneficial to you. So I'd love to hear from you. I am here to serve as a resource for you, setting you up for success to cross the finish line for your best day ever. If there's anything that you want to know more about, don't be shy. Please leave a message down in the comment section below. Also, subscribe to this page and share it with a friend. If you know somebody that's engaged and needs to see this information, I would really appreciate the love. With that, I'm out of here. I'll see you next time. Bye.